So I just wanted to welcome you, say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I think we're lucky that we've got a number of people attending from other parts of the world. So hope you're all keeping safe and well in this current situation we're in. My name's Anthony Narty, and I'm the founder and CEO of iMonitor. And I just wanted to welcome you to our first, or I should say our second webinar in a series of 5. As an organization, we're really, I guess the most important thing is providing thought leadership for our customers, which means that, you know, we're skilled in understanding a number of the different facets that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, and therefore can give you some guidance in terms of where to go and how to achieve some of the business benefits that you're looking for. So today it's about the features and benefits of Integrated Operations Center. It is a new acronym, I guess. We see lots of hashtags these days. This one we shortened to call it the IOC. So as I reference that later, then you'll understand what I'm talking about. We do have another 3 webinars after this, where we'll go into a bit more detail on different topics. And for those that are joining us again, thank you very much that attended the first one. And there we talked about just embracing AI ops to achieve operational intelligence. So today, like I said, we're going to go into a bit more detail. So our other presenters on the line today, we have Teo Dada, who is the founder and CEO of Uncloak, and he's a very knowledgeable individual, so feel free to ask lots of questions at the end. We're also joined by Andrew Yates, who's an IBM, and he's an incident response specialist, which means, again, he's extremely knowledgeable from a security perspective. So just in terms of today, just to put it into context, the reason why I'm seeing a lot of clients talking to me or bringing up the subject to the NOC and the SOC is really because a lot of organizations now have both a NOC and a SOC. Historically, you know, looking at security and incidents was pretty much part of the NOC, and because of the advent of a lot of information and trying to manage that, people are now managing their own SOC as well. So that does give us a number of different challenges, and one of those is really to understand the different technologies that we're using. And obviously, if you look at the way a NOC and a SOC work, there's a lot of overlap. So you'll find that the very same systems that you use in a NOC is what the SOC uses as well. And when an organization has some type of a threat or a breach, then it comes from the SOC, goes into the NOC, and then somebody within there has to recognize what's happening and then send it to the service desk, who then issue a trouble ticket, who then look for the person with the right skill sets to send it back to the SOC. This can obviously take a lot of time. And if you're not integrated as well as you can be, then it can cause a challenge to the organization in terms of being responsive in the right manner. And therefore, when you start to look at where you've got the overlaps, we've seen a TCO reduction of around 60%, which again, we think is quite conservative depending on the size of the organization. I mentioned before in terms of a data breach, because of the magnitude of an issue and because of the way it can go around before it arrives back at the destination where it was first detected, you know, we're seeing on average 6 months for organizations to notice different types of data breaches. Obviously, where it takes down the service, then, you know, you obviously see that straight away. But you can have breaches that do go undetected for quite a number of months. And therefore, clearly, you know, people are trying to deal with it with different teams, focusing different areas. But as we're seeing more and more in IT environment, you know, creating an isolated team just is not working. It takes too long. The relevant people that should be working in the different teams and providing updates may not be available, or may not understand what's going on. And generally, you can go from one person working on an incident or a problem, and suddenly you've got a team of 10, 15 people. So you can quite quickly see how the cost can ramp up. And then we talk about technology, I mean, we know that we've created more, I think they'd say that we've created more data and information in the last 2 years, or was it 3 years, than the world has had previously, which is is a massive amount of information and massive amount of data. And so therefore, teams are struggling with managing the amount of alerts and amounts of threats they deal on a day-to-day basis. So trying to, I guess, bring the teams together and streamline the processes is a key concern. And organizations find that that's the top priority at the moment. And then add to that the skill shortage. Obviously, if you look at the way IT, where we're going, there's no surprise that we're moving much more towards a cloud-centric world. And the reason why is because if you have a team that's delivering a solution through the cloud, then obviously you can scale that to manage many environments. Whereas at the moment, organizations are all vying for the same skills in different teams on their premises, and obviously they're only looking at their environment. So that does end up causing a challenge in terms of the number of people that are actually available that understand what's going on and can fix things in a timely fashion. So with that, I want to now hand you over to Tayo. Tayo, as I said, I'm sure will take you through what he believes is the next steps.
Hi, just want to say thank you very much for attending this webinar today. I think this is the way that we're going to be working for the foreseeable future. Just to give you a bit of background, my background, I've worked in a NOC and SOC environment. I started out computers, funny enough, I used to write games for Commodore 64. If there's anyone over the age of 40 on a call, they'll remember what the Commodore 64 was about. And I used to write games, and then at the age of 13, 14, I really got into hacking. So I was doing a lot of unethical hacking, breaking into businesses and bits and pieces. And then at 18, I started to do some work around do some stuff around CCIE for Cisco, of certified internet expert, and then I've obviously worked in various environments. So just to give you an example, I've worked with I headed up the network operations center for Global Switch. Global Switch are the world's largest carrier neutral data center. I was responsible for the UK office and also 8 overseas offices. I also worked in Bahrain, working along with BT Global Services, helping to run a NOC there. I've been working in Qatar, funny enough, as a subject matter expert, helping the country get geared up for the Qatar 2022 World Cup, which is exciting. And no, I can't get the tickets. Unless you want to be a steward, I can probably get some tickets if you want to be a steward. And in the UK, I've been working on a venture called Uncloak, which is a cybersecurity platform designed for the SME market. But I thought it might be an idea to kind of give you a bit of a real world view, overview in terms of if there's anyone that is out there but working, what's the difference between a NOC and a SOC and working in those different environments. So just to be very, very clear, if you don't mind bringing up some of the statistics and bits and pieces on that first slide, we can just go and run through them, that's fine. So one of the things that I thought it might be very helpful for the call today is really just to understand a couple of things that we experience in a NOC environment. And I've kind of captured these slides to say capturing assets, people, and processes. And the reason why I've named it this is because not only are we concerned about capturing intellectual property, that's obviously the data that's being fed to us from agents, from endpoints, from devices, from network devices out on the internet, intranet, extranet, cloud environments, and have this fed into a central environment and then monitoring. One of the things that you'll find in NOC and SOC environments is that there is no visibility around the processes in the business in regards to what's being monitored there. And so one of the things that I found that working in a NOC environment, for typically in a network infrastructure, businesses that we dealt with in a NOC environment, network operations center, was really geared about obviously monitoring these environments. So at one level, for example, if you can bring up the next point, sorry, you can bring up all the points for this slide. In a typical startup, we found that we might be monitoring, very small business. We might be monitoring 200 devices, and that's literally in a 10 to 20 user office. Then when you move to a SME, which is obviously classified as a business between 50 members of staff up to 250 members of staff, you would exponentially increase the number of devices. And obviously with IoT, that's popped up in the last 5-6 years. We found there's an exponential increase in number of devices that we're trying to manage. And the thing about working in a NOC environment is data is everything, but sometimes too much data, as I say, too much information is no information. And so one of the things that we experienced in a NOC environment was that the deluge of data that was coming through was making life extremely difficult for those that are working within the environment. And another thing is that we didn't have root cause analysis was always done after the event had happened rather than before it. So sometimes trying to track down the actual issue, it was like playing catch and mouse for some aspects for a number of the engineers that I worked with. So one of the characteristics that I found within a NOC environment is that NOC environments are usually a lot larger than SOCs, for example. So typically you may have circa around about 50+ engineers working in a NOC environment, covering from level 1 all the way up to level 3, and sometimes you have level 4, which is usually manufacturers that will be potentially seated in a NOC environment. The thing about working in a NOC environment that we found was the distance and disconnect between us and the underlying client. And this really was quite problematic, because what would often happen is that if a fault came up, like a packet loss issue, or what would often happen is that the client would be in a situation whereby, first thing, they don't know what's going on and why there's an outage. And for us who are in a disparate environment where we completely set away from the client, we didn't necessarily know the effect or the potential issue that potential breach or outage would have on the underlying client. We knew it was important, but we didn't know how important it was. And when you're dealing with, for example, a large enterprise where you've got 100,000 devices, all spitting out spurious data, which would find at least 50% of alerts will be coming through, potentially will be false positive, which is a nightmare for engineers in that environment. Or like, okay, is this important? Is this not important? But every ticket has to be taken into consideration. So one of the things that I found working in a NOC environment was that unless you knew exactly the underlying client and the behavior of the client and what assets the client had, it made it very difficult to understand exactly what the how can I say, the threat landscape that we were dealing with for that potential client. And as you know, a hacker's got two motives. One is to break into a network, and secondly, one is to prevent access to the network. And so when we were experiencing packet loss issues or outages, sometimes it was very, very hard, as mentioned before, to really understand exactly where these issues were emanating from. Some of the tools that we found that we used in a network operations center environment were very much obviously geared around fault management, trouble ticketing systems. We may have worked with, at least 15 different trouble ticketing systems, but in a number of packages that we would often work with in that environment, could be in excess of over, I would say 45 upwards of over 60 packages that we would have to deal with in that environment. And so you can imagine it was quite cumbersome in terms of trying to have an understanding about where the issues were emanating from, how quick we can resolve issues, and what issues were high priority and which issues were low priority. And so one of the things that we often found was that we had to end up building open source pieces of code or getting the alerts that we've got and try and create what's known as a single pane of glass. And a single pane of glass is when you're able to amalgamate all of the alerts into hopefully one centralized window that will give you the most pertinent information that you need to be able to make the right decisions and know what to work with at that point of time. And the thing about a NOC environment, you'll find it's extremely reactive. So it's very difficult to be in an environment where you're sitting down and you can have a scenario where you're able to have a probability of an issue happening and what effect would it actually have if that issue took place and the outage actually happened, and do we actually have a way to mitigate against that particular fault. And this is something which is a real massive issue when I found working in a NOC environment, that we always had to work with stale data that was just coming in order for us to make decisions. So just to, almost conclude on this particular slide, is that stats is everything. And yes, the NOC is great for stats. You would have more stats than you can throw a stick at. But at the same time, there was a large weakness when it came to probability analysis. You didn't actually know what you could do to potentially prevent an issue from reoccurring in the future until the issues actually happened. Okay, if you don't mind.
And I guess,
yes.
sorry, I was just going to say that, Teo, and I guess one of the challenges in the NOC is that not everybody's cleared to access certain files either, depending on, I guess, their level and their pay grade.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very common. Like, for example, if you're coming from a CISP or security standpoint, you might be dealing with what's known as a Brewer and Nash model. So for example, I'm security cleared. I work with central government and defense through a number of contracts with MOD. And one of the things is that you have to have what's known as, we don't call it Chinese walls because it's unethical now, but you have these walls of barriers to say, okay, right, if you've got a certain level of privileges, only you get access to that particular level. But you also can't get access to levels that are lower than it because you might be able to influence information that's at a lower level. So what would often happen, you have exactly what you mentioned, Anthony, is disinformation. You wouldn't have all the information that you potentially would need to make a decision. So, the third level guys, who are the guys where, you've got to pass the food under the door, don't talk to them. The first level guys were the ones who were getting hit with all the new alerts, but they didn't always know exactly what to do. So one of the things about you finding a NOC is that you've got different levels of segregation, but unfortunately with that, the dissemination of information won't be passed from level to level, making troubleshooting a lot harder and a lot longer to resolve and sort out an issue. So the CTR, or this is basically when we talk about the time to resolve an issue, would be through the roof because we didn't always have the information at hand. And that's one of the issues that you definitely found working with a NOC environment. Okay, now moving on to a SOC environment. If we go to the next page, just giving some other bits and pieces that I found working in a SOC environment. A SOC environment is a really, really different type of environment. One of the things I found working in the Securities Operations Center is, first thing, you had a lot less engineers for starters. So, Cisco research, for example, have said that there is a shortage of over 1 million cybersecurity analysis out there. So what you often found was that you would have a set of engineers that would have to make a multiple set of assumptions about the information that they were seeing. So if you don't mind just showing everything on this slide, that's fine. Absolutely everything on this slide. So very much characterized by a small team, dedicated team, knew what they were doing, but also what I found working in a SOC is that information also wasn't being shared amongst different parties. One thing you'll find about working in a SOC is that the engineers that work in the SOC were unfortunately quite anally retentive. And what I mean by that, they're in a situation where, they knew that information was power. And so you'd often find that some of the, a certain set of engineers would have access to information and knew how to fix it, but they wouldn't necessarily disseminate that information to some of the younger engineers that were trying to cut their teeth and sort themselves out. What we did often find with the number of alerts that we used to get, and as you can imagine, since we've had COVID, the number of cybersecurity attacks have gone up over 500% since March. So we're in a situation right now where the number of attacks that businesses are going through on a day-to-day basis are going through the roof, and especially IoT was the largest increase in number of alerts. But now that you've got potential hackers sitting at home and script kiddies that aren't necessarily hackers but find a piece of malware online and send it to someone, you're finding that alerts are going through the roof. And as mentioned before, hackers are interested in either getting access to information or preventing access to information. And so it's an absolute, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to just add something in there. I was recently speaking to a customer, a large retailer, and he actually said that he took one of the senior cybersecurity experts from the SOC and put them in a NOC for 2 weeks to understand what went on. And at the time, the business was skeptical because I know we've not talked about it, but I guess the average salary of somebody in the SOC at that level is quite a lot more than somebody in the NOC. And,
yes.
and therefore, you know, as you said, there's these walls that exist, and I guess people are very proud of what, you know, the level that they're at. But essentially, this gentleman then realized the complexity of a number of the events and the lack of information that the NOC were dealing with. And he said it helped to actually increase efficiency in his organization quite a lot, just from a point of view of having somebody sit in a NOC and understanding when they send something, what it looks like and how they deal with it. And of course, this isn't always possible for most organizations. And as you said, with the fact that, you know, a lot of the threats have grown so much, and especially recently, everyone seems to be running, you know, they're sort of running in treacle and have so much to deal with. So again, it's quite difficult to amalgamate the teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think one of the things like you mentioned is, and I think what's unfortunately, we can look at technical issues, but you know, when you're dealing with people, you know, you're dealing with a culture, and so you know, the culture of a SOC is complete, like you mentioned, is very different to a NOC, completely different sets of scenarios that they encounter. But the SOC team, you know, could really help to not only, you know, see what, you know, understand root cause analysis, help the business, you know, the NOC team to understand exactly these are the issues that are coming up, and the reason why they're coming up is because we've never solved this issue behind it, you know, and you know, something hasn't been patched, and so now there's a denial of service attack that's happening on that device. You know, that the SOC would deal with that, but the NOC won't necessarily be notified. Now, traditionally, as you mentioned before, the NOC are responsible for feeding information from EMS, from their element management system, from the performance monitoring software into the SOC environment for the SOC to be able to use. But in terms of there being a very clear channel of information flowing backwards and forwards between a NOC and SOC, unfortunately, that's something which still hasn't sorted itself out. And you know, as mentioned before, there are definitely huge synergies just with the teams working together. You know, having steering committees, having steering meetings, understanding, you know, why this issue came up, how we resolve it, how can we mitigate it against in the future. So that's something that's become a lot more prevalent. So people are starting to chat a little bit more, but unfortunately, when you're dealing with, as I mentioned before, the number of investigations are so high that you'll often find there's a huge turnover of staff in a SOC environment because the amount of information that they have to deal with. So it's great, yes, to have a SOC, but then if you actually look at some statistics say that there is a customer retention of over 38% turnover. So for every 10 members of staff, you've got 3.8 that leave after the first year because the amount of data that they're having to deal with, they can't sort out quickly. So, and I think that's a really interesting statistic that's come through.
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, Ty, as you're talking, obviously I speak to a number of executives and, you know, we talk about these things all the time, but, you know, you're almost creating a whole new world for me, just in the way that I'm understanding the way that the communities are, the way they need to interact or maybe not interact, and clearly the high cost of losing somebody. You know, I know that you know, there's certain metrics as we have today, lots of metrics for everything. But I mean, you can imagine somebody losing someone from the SOC that spent a great deal of time understanding intrinsically your organization and the way that it works. And if you think about one of the things that we talk about, creating smart data, you know, it's not easy to extrapolate all the information you need to give somebody information to make a business decision. And that's what I guess we're talking about here. It's information to make a business decision that can either reduce an attack or curtail one before it takes hold.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, and that's fantastic, and that's, you know, I think with the onset of things like GDPR, obviously General Data Protection Regulation that came out in May 2018, what you're finding is that businesses now are being pushed from a compliance perspective to sort themselves out, and so this is helping them to realize the importance, because one of the exercises you do when you're doing GDPR is do your data flow, where you actually have to understand where your assets are in your business, how does information move throughout your different databases and systems, websites. This is really important because it helps the business to understand the importance of the data that they're managing, and also then helps them to hopefully to value the NOC and SOC even more, because they're obviously trying to keep them protected at all times. But yeah, this hopefully segues into my last slide that I have,
Yeah, let
just
me
as an
move on
overview.
for you.
Absolutely.
So, sorry, I've seen a couple of people raise their hands or send a question. We will do Q&A at the end. I should have mentioned it at the beginning, so I apologize
Sure.
for that.
No
So
problem.
sorry, back to you, Taya.
No, it's fine. So just like in key take, I mean, the question that always comes up, and the reason why I think about assets, people, and processes is because assets are more than data that is being fed into a system. You know, I think where businesses and where NOCs and SOCs need to be is understand the value of data and reducing the amount of information that is there. So when I'm talking about return on investment, I think if businesses were able to take into consideration the importance of having, you know, succinct information within a NOC environment and a SOC environment that can be pulled together so businesses can make better decisions about where the risks are and what issues are happening, then return on investment will actually make a lot more sense, because oftentimes some organizations are wary of whether or not they should invest on NOC and SOC. But when they start to understand where the information, the importance of the information that's passing through their systems and how it can help protect their network, and the importance of keeping your network up and running today is so important. So return on investment is something which I definitely believe that we need to be in a situation where we can produce really high quality information that the businesses can actually make key business decisions based on. And I do believe that's the reason why we get to a place where we have to learn to integrate the NOC and SOC together to produce that type of information that's needed to make the strategic decisions. So in terms of key takeaways, there's three things I kind of wanted to mention on there. I'm not sure if they come up. Sorry, do you mind, Anthony, clicking the next bit? Hopefully there's 3 bits and pieces on there. Oh, whoops, that's gone to the next slide.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's fine. I think we're going to summarize it at the end, Taya. So
Absolutely.
I'll go through that, no problem. I guess the one thing that I'd like to add, when you talk about the return of investment, I mean, we've seen very public information shared with organizations that have been taken down or lost data or information, telling people that they were holding their credit card information and everything else. So I guess you also need to factor on the reputational damage and the damage to the brand when you're looking at this as well. So it really is a challenge. It's a problem. It's one that it changes from day to day as well. You know, the enemy is not a static one. They're constantly moving and evolving. And so when you look at the return of investment, you really have to look at what your brand is worth, and then it comes down to how you protect that brand.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I mean, in cybersecurity, we call it the slow burn. You know, when an organization's in a scenario where they think, okay, being down is one thing, but then as you mentioned, if someone can't get to you and you can't process it, the knock-on effect throughout the business is humongous. And you know, oftentimes you hear statistics, released by the government saying that, you know, within 3 years, we often attack happening in a business, 50% of those businesses fail, 3 years later after a breach.
Wow.
So it kind of gives you an idea that, you know, getting a slap on the hand and 4% of your turnover, which is a huge amount if you're multinational, is one thing, but then your business going under because of a breach, which could have been resolved or could have been sorted out or could have been dealt with a lot quicker, is humongous. So yeah, absolute return on investment. Organizations were able to calculate, then they can realize, wow, it's definitely worthwhile investment to do that.
Excellent. So Taya, look, thank you so much for your insights there. I think
Sure.
extremely valuable, and I hope it kind of explains to people from somebody who has been on both sides. That's very rare. So I'd just like to move on now to Andrew. I apologize, Andrew, we're running a bit over time, so if we can keep yours nice and sharp. I know it always is anyway. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So brilliant. Thank you everybody for joining. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Again, a really welcome to everybody for joining. I'm going to talk a little bit about the IBM Resilience. I'm the client technical professional here in the United Kingdom. And I look after the IBM Resilient platform. And at the start, I'm an incident specialist. I've done both the pre-sales side of the business and also professional services. So I have an example of customers of why they've purchased or invested in the SOAR market, the security registration, but also how mature and getting that increase in efficiency. Very quickly, just to kind of recap on some of the points about that single dependence. And so from a technology standpoint,
Andrew,
this is where the informs part of your wider.
Andrew, I don't know if it's just me, but I think you're cutting in and out a bit.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's much better. Sorry, we seem to have lost Andrew a bit there. Andrew?
Hello?
Andrew, can you hear me?
If you guys hear me, or no, it's very quickly just doing a quick introduction.
Yeah, you're back now.
Technical standpoint. I don't know if you guys can hear me all right now. Tony?
I think we're struggling there with Andrew.
A little bit of packet loss at the moment. So,
so let me pick up on Andrew's slide anyway. I mean, I think we can quite see here. I mean, Andrew's talking about, obviously from an IBM perspective, having a number of different technologies that integrate to pretty much give you good coverage across the security paradigm. So I guess we mentioned it earlier, but if we look at the type of attacks that are happening now, 65% of organization are saying that the severity of attacks are increasing, and therefore the best way to think about it is that if you already had a team and let's say you had 10 people and they're already busy and suddenly it increases by 65%, you can't just look at that in terms of a percentage increase, because it's also the severity of it. So if it's quite complex, it could take 10 of the team to try and resolve it, and if you have 3 or 4 of them and you've only got 10 people, then you can see how quickly you can end up out of control. And again, trying to find skilled staff is very, very difficult. Organizations are out there, they're hiring, and of course they're in a competitive market, so the cost to acquire that skill is also rising. And I personally, obviously within our organization, have skilled people, and you can just see how that cost of that is going up. And of course, because the landscape is constantly changing and evolving as well, you then have to factor in, you've got to train those people as well, right? So you've got to keep their skills relevant, and you've got to keep it on point. And the other environment you need to provide, although we're working from home, is technology. If your teams need to have access to the right technology to do their job, and so you need to invest in that. You need to invest in the environment, and make sure that your staff are happy. If you look at a lot of startups, a lot of organizations that are the biggest ones in the world right now, you see their I guess employee satisfaction is through the roof. To provide free coffee. I think they even have gyms and yoga sessions and everything there. So although if you've been around for quite a long time, you might think, oh, that's a bit too much. It is real, and this is what people expect now. And that's how you get, you need to try and retain your staff, and you need to respect and appreciate them. So again, people want different titles, they want pay rises. It does become quite challenging. And then that again goes onto your HR team, and the HR team have to deal with that as well. So, I guess from the first two obviously are pretty linked, and I think it's something that organizations may or may not be struggling with most every day. And then we go into in terms of compliance. Andrew, is that you?
Yeah, guys, hear me on the phone now?
Yes, I'm up to the compliance. Do you want me to hand over the baton, or do you want me to carry on?
I'll take over. If it cuts out again, I'll leave it to you to finish it off.
Okay, you sound fine.
But yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Tony. So yeah, absolutely. To resonate the points there that kind of Tony was speaking about, the increase in volume of attacks is really common across a lot of organizations. And exactly to Tony's point, as that increase goes ahead, feeding into that second point about the lack of available staff out there, I think currently the statistic sits at 2 million outstanding jobs in industry. That impacts on the ability to respond quickly enough. And we know that when we have a huge volume of alerts that come in that could, for example, potentially take 30 minutes plus to triage, the impact is that, it could eventually turn out to be a false positive. So you use 30 minutes to determine that it isn't something malicious. Meanwhile, you have all of these true positive alerts that need to be actioned, need to be prioritized, and you're just not getting eyes on screen. And so, kind of feeding into that third point around the regulatory landscape, regulations are not going to, probably be that lenient in that regard, especially as we spoke before about the GDPR. So in regard to that, what they really want you to demonstrate is having the ability to show you were prepared for the incident. And where resilient comes to your standpoint, is helping fundamentally reduce your overall business risk by increasing your ability to respond faster. So we know statistically that the shorter amount of time that we can respond to an incident, the less time that threat actor is going to have in your environment to execute on his objectives. And so that in turn is going to, as I said, reduce that overall business risk and decrease the impact to your organization. And that could be across any number of the three different tenets. So it could be, whether their objective is to affect your confidentiality, your integrity of data, or the availability of data or source of a service. Fundamentally, where resilient is going to provide that is by having that consistent and repeatable process. So having something that can demonstrate that you have a process in place that you can respond to in the event of an incident or a breach, having the ability to automate and orchestrate those processes. And then that final point really is about bringing it all together, right? So we spoke before at the start of this session about that single pane of glass. And this is where, from a technology standpoint, not obviously replacing the fact that what technology is doing here is bringing people and process together. And that is using technology in the most effective way possible here. It's got the full encompassing of that people process technology. And so if an organization has 65 customers from 45 different vendors, especially in the context of a security operations center working with a NOC, which is incredibly common, a security incident does not exist just within the SOC, right? You will have to involve multiple teams. And especially as I spoke earlier, the investigation of that incident is probably in most cases going to involve working with the NOC. And so, especially from an audited standpoint, what typically happens in a lot of customers that we speak to, and I speak to on a regular basis, their big challenge when they start to mature into this is that they need to collaborate with their NOC on a basis. And as soon as they deviate out of a particular process and involves them contacting another part of the organization, either via email or creating an external ticketing solution to contact them, that's where they start to get issues, is because you suddenly lose that auditability. You lose that ability to track, and the processes fundamentally just are not aligned. And so you could be working from a security standpoint on a really, really tight SLA, right? So you might have to respond to this in order to protect the business within 48 hours. And that could even be associated to a particular regulation compliance. But fundamentally, the NOC won't necessarily have visibility of that. And so, from a technology standpoint, Resilient is in place to enable that to happen. And this is the point here of having an integrated operations center from an operations standpoint. So Tony, if we could move to the next slide, please. Down to what is a SOC plan, right? So what do we look at? The three major tenets, and Resilient was being the market leader in this space, and we actually have been in this space for quite a few years now. We originally started as a security incident response platform that's evolved into a SOC platform. We look at it as three major tenants and as first and foremost, incident case management. It is essential that when you are working on an incident, especially in the context of a security operations center working with a NOC, or beyond that, in fact, there's multiple different teams that you could have over the course of an incident. You need to have auditability. You need to fundamentally track exactly what is going on in that incident, who has ownership, who's working on particular tasks, when are those tasks due, what is the process that needs to follow, and this process from a static standpoint, but a process that is dynamic. So as you learn more about the incident, as you go down the path of determining this piece of malware is a ransomware attack or a Trojan horse or a rootkit, you can adjust your process as Resilient learns exactly what that process needs to do. And the benefit, again, just to really hit that point at home, is about having that consistency and repeatability from a regulation standpoint. But the benefit to the business on a day-to-day basis is the reduction in business risk. So the more we can reduce that extra few minutes here and there add up over the course of a year to be a huge amount of saving in time. And again, we know from a people perspective, nobody enjoys doing the mundane tasks. There's elements within security operations centers and NOC operations whereby there is mundane tasks. There's things where we have data certainty, and those are what we can automate. But fundamentally in cybersecurity, we lack a huge amount of data certainty. And this is where the concept of orchestration comes into play. Now, I think the one thing that's really missed around how we kind of look at it from this slide is actually something, again, we mentioned earlier, and that is about metric KPIs. And again, a lot of organizations do have a lot of metrics and KPIs already, but it really are actually an essential part of the business. And because the key thing here is about the measurement of improvement over efficiency. So we need to understand exactly what our current baseline is, how long we take to respond to a threat, what is our landscape. And again, this is a journey that obviously, whether you choose to go on this and purchase a SOC platform or work with a partner and help leverage that expertise, it's something that is going to benefit you as an organization as you move forward. And that final key tenet just there is the threat intelligence. So the ability to really accelerate that initial triage, right? So we spoke before around, typically 30 minutes. A lot of my customers that I speak to will have between 30 minute and a 60-minute SLA to triage that incident. Well, if we can reduce time to respond, whether that down to 1 or 2 minutes, and help to prioritize based on those assets that you have in your organization or those individuals, for example, that could be affected by that particular potential attack, the quicker we can start to respond to it. And again, really drilling that point home, reduce that business risk.
And I guess, Andrew, I was just going to say that, and of course, being a global organization and providing the solution globally, you can learn from things that are happening on the other side of the world and dynamically update your, your security model so that by the time, if it arrives here, then you are protected as well. So I think that's a key point in that, this isn't specific to one geography.
No, exactly. And yeah, especially for, those of you that are listening that may have, for example, follow this on SOCs or 24/7 SOCs, as you see an outbreak happen in one part of your region, fundamentally any system is only ever as strong as its weakest link. So as soon as you learn about an attack in a particular region, leveraging these analytics dashboards or data points where you see in the threat spread from other parts of the organization, again, especially from an MSSP perspective, this is a huge advantage because you have the ability to leverage expertise that they can see from a higher level perspective. So they can see from other customers across that are being managed and understand exactly what were the threats, what were the indicators of compromise, and start to prevent that from actually having as an outbreak within your own organization. So getting a head up on that, is really, really valuable. And that is, again, a huge benefit of an MSSP in that context, that look at it from a NOC and a SOC perspective. So very quickly, just on this slide, and I will ritual through. So if we can just bring up all of the pieces here. The slide here is fundamentally about showing you the flow of an incident. So first and foremost, we have up in the top left-hand corner, data feeding into that single pane of glass, into your SOC platform as a technology solution. So this is the feeding in, the generation of those alerts. And again, it could come from multiple sources, such as your SIEM platform. It could be a data loss prevention solution, or it could even be, you, the end customer, you have, for example, an end user who's got a pop up on his laptop, says he needs to pay a Bitcoin, most likely obviously a ransomware attack, and you contact your MSSP, you contact iMonitor, obviously that then feeds into resilience. So again, the ability to correlate against multiple instances, track it in a single incident, the ability to then very quickly move into that bottom right corner. So this is the automatic triage, really understanding first and foremost the external threat intelligence, right? So what are those indicators of compromise? Known bad IP addresses, MD5 hashes, any of those indicators of compromise that correlate to external solutions. Next thing is things like the vulnerability management. So do we have any CVEs, right? So common vulnerabilities running on those endpoints that could have been used, part of that compromising of the endpoint. And then finally, looking at the contextual, which is absolutely essential, right? So being able to say, this is what's involved. We understand the criticality of there being, an attack, a service, or that particular asset. So that could be, for example, if we have a malware outbreak and it is a transactional server, then that's hugely impactful, right? Compare that to, say, a development server, the priority could be significantly different. So how can you prioritize exactly what should be concentrated? And that can be built around what your appetite is or how you want to do that. And then
of course,
lead
Andrew,
into...
sorry, Andrew. Sorry, just go on. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Yeah, go ahead. What are you gonna add?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I was just conscious of where we are in terms of time. And I was just going to put it into context that, we talk about the integration of the NOC and the SOC. This just gives you a really good illustration of the complexity of trying to manage all of the things that are going on in the organization. And I guess one of the things that I mentioned up front is why now? And I guess because of the deluge of information coming in, if choosing the right partner that could build this type of environment and obviously populate it with the right people, the right skills is extremely key. So although, when you look at it, it could be seen as a scary slide. There's a lot of investment going on in there, a lot of integration. This is what we're building, and this is what we're delivering to our customers to make it a lot simpler and easy to digest. So I just wanted to add that. And Andrew, I just want to try and move along just from a point of view. I've got a few questions.
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay? So I didn't mean to cut you off. So if I just go to, I think if you want to cover some of the customer successes, I think that would be quite interesting for people, Andrew.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got obviously a number of customers. We've one of the largest customer bases globally within the store market. Obviously, just a few just to very quickly talk about. TalkTalk is one of our customers that purchased Resilient a few years ago. And again, the really key thing for them was that auditability record in the context of a regulation. So looking at how they can manage their security operations, look at that auditability trail record, and understand who takes ownership of those instances. So again, this is really something for you to take away. You can have a read through. And again, we do have on our website a number of case studies, TalkTalk being one of them. Secure 24, again, from this aspect, it's really that ecosystem. So again, they refer to it as a force multiplier. So let's say, for example, we have a level 1 analyst, being able to accelerate them to almost a level 2 analyst, right? Having that consistent, repeatable process. And again, referring to it as that a kind of joined up feature around like QRadar and the Resilient and so on. So again, we have a case study here as well. So feel free to jump to our website. And I'll hand over to you, Benny. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. We got there in the end with the technology challenges. Maybe next time we won't have such restrictions. We can all be in the same office. So for those listening, I just wanted to just summarize some of the key takeaways. I think we talked about the alert overload. And again, as much as the teams are sharing, but it can, they're sharing information, and just sharing it doubles in some terms, some cases doubles the amount of information you're trying to deal with. So that's a key challenge that people are trying to overcome. And then also, if you can integrate the NOC and the SOC, then we need to focus on creating smart data. And that smart data really is cutting through all the complexity and just saying, this service is going to go down and it's going to cost us X amount of money over a period of time, so that you can make a business decision, one single operational view. So, everybody can interpret that view in different ways, but essentially it's one version of the truth. And also, a security incident affects everybody, not just the organization, not just the brand, it could be individuals. It's not nice if you think somebody's got your personal information. So, it really is not just down to the SOC. And again, the threats are evolving, right? So they're changing every day. And trying to keep up with that is a challenge. And as Andrew's just saying, reaching I guess a SOAR is a journey, and it's not something that just happens overnight. But being able to work through that and understand where you are in the life cycle is important. And then of course a robust and flexible infosec model. which is, obviously an infra security model is important, being up with the latest regulations and compliance. You need to make sure the systems are there. And obviously, if there is an issue, we all know that these occur. Just being able to show how you handle it is important. If the more efficient you are, the more successful you can be. I think that's pretty clear. And just to summarize again, customers that we've talked to are looking in excess of 60% cost savings by bringing these two things together. All right, so with that, let's just move on to some of the questions. In fact, I'll leave the slide up. So the first question I've got is the security a technical or business problem? So who wants to take that, Andrew? Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So fundamentally, it's both, right? I mean, it's technical in some instances, but fundamentally, it gets all going back to business. Security is a business problem. It affects the business assets and it is fundamentally impacting business risk. So in that kind of context, I personally am a really strong believer that when we look at security vulnerabilities, when we look at building our security posture, our risk appetite, we don't reduce risk down to a nil factor. What we do is we reduce risk down to an acceptable level. That's what we do in the context of managing business risk. And so in the context of security, we need to take that same approach, right? We look at security and we apply what is the business impact. And again, this is where process and maturing into SOAR especially, it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's certainly obviously not a silver bullet. But what it is going to do is significantly increase your overall efficiency in responding to those cyber threats. And the impact is therefore, as I've mentioned a few times, it is a business risk thereof. I don't know if there's anything else you guys would add to that at all.
Yeah,
sorry, John.
No, I think it's a really pertinent point, and I think that what we're starting to understand is the importance of what is defined as to be an asset. So, I mean, it's definitely a business risk because the business will suffer depending on whether or not the asset is available. So, for example, from an ISO 27001 standpoint, you have three elements: confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. So if the data isn't available and if integrity of it has been damaged or the confidentiality has been exposed where there's been a breach and information has become available where it shouldn't be, that will have a detrimental effect on your asset, which means it has a detrimental effect on your business. And so, as mentioned by Andrew, it is extremely pertinent and extremely important to be in a scenario where you can actually address the issue as quickly as possible, because you have all these different elements working together to give you this nirvana of this single pane of glass where you can actually resolve issues a lot quicker than what we're currently able to do, therefore reducing the risk and mitigating risks in some elements. You can't avoid risk, and you can ignore risks, but you can't avoid risks. And so definitely, this is definitely a business risk as a / technical risk at the same time.
Okay, great. And the second question I have is, are there examples of organizations that have done this, and what was the outcome for them? I assume when they say the outcome for them is they mean from a cost benefit analysis.
Andrew, do you want me to answer this one, or do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I'll quickly jump in and just do a quick piece on it. So, I mean, there's fundamentally it's dictated by every individual customer. So every customer is going to have their own risk appetite. It's going to have their own selection of security tools in place, their own process that they fundamentally are going to do based on a particular type of threat. And so that, again, is going to dictate what that efficiency gains look like and what the return on investment is. And I guess, yeah, so it's fundamentally, from my perspective, I think it's a unique thing for every customer. But there is definitely, within every process, there's always going to be data certainty, right? There is going to be examples whereby there is a Monday task and it takes 5-10 minutes per incident, and that will be repeated multiple times a day, week, month, and so on. And it's about isolating and truly understanding what they are, and then automating those steps or orchestrating those processes where we don't have the data certainty. Anything you would add to that potentially?
I didn't hear that. Sorry, Andrew.
Andrew, he's just asking to anything. I think we need to move on to the next one anyway. Thank you for that, Andrew. It says, how long does it take to integrate my NOC and SOC?
It's a good question. I would like to answer that. I mean, what I found from working in both environments, it really is dependent on the number of devices that you currently got in your environment, what endpoints you're monitoring, how much information is coming out of that endpoint. And then all you have to take in consideration is really a business transformation project that needs to be taken into place. It's not as easy just to put a bunch of software in an environment and away you go. It doesn't work that way. First, you have to understand what is deemed to be a risk, what is deemed to be an alert. So, for example, there's loads of different SIEM solutions which are able to pick up security alerts, but they're not very good, or they're not good at all. But they're only as clever the person that's putting the information in there. So one of the things I found is that literally spent 60% of the time when we were setting up SOCs actually trying to make sure that the software will give us reporting that we need from it. So really, it's really on a case-by-case basis, which will consist of you having a business analysis team that are able to understand the assets, understand how the assets work within the business, what the data flows are, what is deemed to be in an alert, and then working with the technical department to say, okay, right, how can we be able to track those alerts and respond to it? So, this is definitely not necessarily a project that can be done overnight. It's definitely a program of works that will require various departments within the business to be able to come together and produce the information that's necessary to build a NOC and SOC. But for example, just from personal experience, it's taken us, it took 9 months to build a NOC, and it took 18 months to build a SOC. So just gives you an idea of some of the issues that we've had, and that was in working out in Bahrain. Yeah,
of course. And I was just going to add to that. When we've worked with customers, what we've done is gone through our design thinking methodology approach. It's really 5 steps. The first one is get the key stakeholders. Obviously, can't get them in the room, but do it virtually, where everyone comes up with the ideas, puts together a number of different areas that they're focused on and what the challenges are. And then from there, we can put a technical person, almost like a business analyst, to spend some time in the environment, looking at the topology view, the architectural analysis of the way the whole organization is set up and how the flows work, because as Teo was just mentioning, and then from there, then build a complete holistic picture of the organization end to end, and then you map all the different processes and all the compliance that you'd need to adhere to on top. And then we present that back to the customer, and then we all agree which is the high priorities. And so some organizations want some quick wins. So we'll focus on delivering that quick win whilst keeping an eye on what the actual roadmap is and the journey that they want to go on. And then we start to work with them to design it and to build it. And I think, in terms of most solutions, yes, you get some that are out of the box, and maybe some of them are industry specific, but there's always going to be some tailoring that's required. But we work with the customers in hand to do that. And then the last thing is really how we deploy that. It can be a flexible model, a hybrid cloud model, we call it, where we do the magic in the cloud and most of the technology sits on premise. And then the last thing is how they pay for that. And it can be a monthly or a yearly charge. And so from a business perspective, when we engage, that's what we do. So as Teo was saying, there's probably no perfect answer. How long does it take? It just really is what you need to achieve and how quickly we can do that. Okay, and then the last one is an interesting one. It says you talk about a 60% cost saving. Can you explain that a bit more? So shall I start? Okay, go on, Andrew.
Oh no, I was going to say, do you guys want to take that question? Just because I think it's more focused around the integrated operations center.
Yeah, I think when we talk about 60%, it's actually quite conservative. I think what we're talking about is, if you remember before, we talked about duplication of assets, which is the investment you make in technology, in people, and even in buildings, right? So we have to house it somewhere. And then the fact that everybody is working in silos, but potentially 80% of what they're doing it crosses over. And once you remove that, then you start to buy or invest in a single environment, a single instance of the technology that you require to deliver and to provide the business benefits and the efficiencies that you're looking for. And then you're also talking about people. We talked about the lack of skills. So some organizations outsource some of the work that they need doing, and that's not necessarily the most cost-effective way to do that. And so to try and keep everything together in the same environment is what we're talking about, and it starts to give you some cost savings there. So Teo, is there anything you wanted to add to that before we finish up?
No, I think you've nailed it. Really, I mean, biggest cost that we found was engineering in that environment, and sourcing of engineers and having engineers in an environment. So, if there is having a platform that is able to reduce the amount of engineering that is required to make sure you give the right information to the engineers that are there, makes life a lot easier, especially in a SOC environment. So, absolutely, there is definitely cost savings that can be made there.
Okay, so look, let's finish it there. Thank you, both of you, Andrew and Tayo, for your insights and sharing with us some of your experiences. I think it's been extremely useful. In terms of moving forward, we do have another webinar. Now we go into what we call CSAS as a service. So I think it's a nice follow-on. So that's cybersecurity as a service. So a number of the challenges, a number of the complexity that we talk about, being able to deliver that to an organization as a service is probably a good place to go in a bit more detail about that complexity. I'll be with you, your host again, and then we'll be joined by Raj, who's runs our cybersecurity practice here. And he's got some excellent experience that he'll probably share with you as well. And of course, Tayo is going to be back with us again. So look, thank you very much, all of you, the people that I know it's evening time. Thanks for staying up and listening to us, and I hope you found it useful. And obviously, we have recorded it, so we'll send you a recording, and that'll be available on our website. So thank you very much, and look after yourselves.